I'm going to record this. The code is right there, ABCMO. So put it in, get in real quick. I'm going to fly through this. We're going to fly through this. Last time we looked at political transformations. Right now we're going to look at economic transformations that occurred. And the two are interlinked in a lot of ways. ABCMO. ABCMO. A, B as in Volker. Victor. Vulture. Oh, Vulture. My last name does although it just means people in German.
Wait, what's the dude from the Victor dude from
Victor von Doom. It's Gru, actually. It's Gru. The guy from Gru? Yeah, from Despicable Me. Oh, that's, yeah. Okay.
Does anyone have a charger for the MacBook?
Hopefully everyone's in. If you're not, get in. Okay, so we're looking at, I think we already talked about this image, do we not? Okay, so basically this image, of course, created about the Atlantic slave trade. You kind of see various emotions in this picture. Of course, you see a slaver who's a European who's going to have a probably very positive attitude about this situation. A man on the right who seems to be very pleased with the situation. Where do we assume he might be, or what position might he be?
A chief.
He's probably a chief of some sort, somewhat of high status. In fact, it looks like he's probably smoking some form of tobacco, just from the Americas. Interesting. And then you also have these men here to the left who are shackled, who are slaves, being sold from the African to the European. So it was a relationship that existed between Europeans and Africans. Okay? We're not going to do this question. We're going to skip over it because, again, we got to fly through this. So, Portuguese Empire of Commerce. We talked about this. The Portuguese were looking for a route to Asia. And they wanted to ensure that they controlled the Indian Ocean Basin. But at this time, the Indian Ocean Basin is controlled by the Arab and Chinese worlds. And once the Chinese exit, when they pull their treasure fleets out, you start to see a drastic change and an opportunity for the Portuguese to come in and take over the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. So, again, the Portuguese, as they begin to explore the Indian Ocean, learn about the trade winds that go back and forth in the Indian Ocean. They're seasonal. So they follow those seasonal trade routes and establish what's known as a trading post empire. They have outposts all over Africa, India, and they're there essentially to establish trade relationships. So they're not settling, they're only interested in profit and trade. But Portugal at this time, and a lot of the other European powers, are very poor and fragmented. They're not powerful centralized states like the Ottomans and the Chinese. So they have to look elsewhere to make money. Their domestic economies are weak. They have to look overseas and establish trading post empires. Okay? Again, this PowerPoint will be available, and this screen recording will be available. So if you need to take more notes on these types of things later, just refer back to this section in the screen recording. Okay, I'll have it uploaded to YouTube in a link. All right? So again, we just talked about these trading outposts. The Portuguese, who were the first to go around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, you see that they were settling along the coasts of Africa and even in Goa, India. The Dutch, looking to do the same type of thing. They're establishing themselves in parts of Southeast Asia. So these, and of course the Philippines by the Spanish, we're going to talk about why that's significant here in just a moment, especially for the silver trade. So they're interested in trade, not settling. Okay, keep going. Okay, again, dominant figure in this image, white European, right? Whereas you have black Africans who are working as slaves in spice trade. Okay? So Spain established itself in the Philippines because they wanted to challenge Portugal in the trade in Asia. And they did establish themselves as a Christian outpost. Again, we need to understand that the Spanish and Portuguese were interested in spreading their faith along with their economy, Roman Catholicism, and they tried to convert some of the local Chinese population, but to very little success. So we're going to that's talked about more culturally, which will be the next section we look at. Okay, forced relocation, tribute, taxes, unpaid labor. Okay, a lot of the people in the Philippines were forced to relocate from certain islands to live on other islands, forced to pay tribute and work as unpaid laborers as well. So Manila, because of the Chinese who are already there, as well as the Spanish when they arrive, have a very diverse population. A lot of people in modern-day Philippines have Chinese descent, local Filipino descent, and Spanish blood as well. So there's a lot of blending that happened in the Philippines as a result of this. Okay. East India companies, there was both the Dutch and the British. They were established to basically, they were joint stock companies, basically put together and sponsored by the empires from which they came, but they had a lot of outside investors as well. The more investment you have, the more people who are willing to sponsor these voyages, the less risk there is. So if the company goes under, it's not going to hurt just one person. They're not going to lose their fortune. It's spread, the risk is spread out amongst a lot of people. So these companies would eventually displace the Portuguese in terms of power and influence overseas, the Dutch and the English. And they established their own trading post empires, carrying trade within Asia. So they're kind of moving things within Asia, making money, and then it makes its way back to their home country, the Dutch and the East India Trading Companies. So this next image we see, this is an image that hung over the central offices of the British East India Company. Just take a close look at that. The image is going to be available on the next slide as well. But think about what are some things that are conveyed in this image about the relationship between colonial states and Europeans in this image. Okay? So who do we see? Who are the main figures in this image? Okay, white individuals. Who do we think these refer back to? They look like something you learned in world geography or in world studies. What is it called? Not world studies. It's global issues last year, right? Remember the mythology project? You notice any Greek mythological characters?
I can't remember the name.
Okay, right. So this looks like Hermes, right? Hermes or Mercury, I don't know which. Are they the same person? I don't know.
It's one
It's all the same to me. And then we have what looks like probably Zeus or some central figure in Greek mythology. So these individuals are prominent, powerful, and it looks like these colonial people, this is probably an Indian woman or someone from an overseas colony, looks like they're paying some form of tribute or service to those Greek gods who are represented as the Western world. So we see the relationship between the East and the West. Who appears to be more powerful in this relationship? East or the West? The West meaning Europeans. West. East is obviously on their hands and knees, right? Okay. Anyways, we're going to keep going. So Asians and Asian commerce. Like I said, European presence is less significant in Asia. China and Japan believe themselves to be self-sufficient. They do not need to rely on outside powers. Remember, the Ming Dynasty restored rule from the Mongols to the Chinese. And their kind of goal was to be self-sufficient and reemerge as a middle kingdom in East Asia. So when Europeans tried to influence these places and get into the markets of China and sell European products to China, China was like, no, thank you. We're not interested. We make things better. We do things better. You should be coming to us to get things, not the other way around. So again, French influence and Siam, which is modern day Thailand, in that region, they were expelled. The Japanese expelled a lot of missionaries from Portugal and other places as well. They rejected Christianity and European goods and commerce. They only allowed the Dutch to trade in Japan. And then Asian merchants were kind of spread about the region. I'm going to talk more about diasporic merchants. You can see it in my chapter 12 slideshow that's available on the agenda. I talk more about them on that slideshow. Okay? So just refer to that. Okay, so again, this is Tokugawa Japan, Shogunate Japan, feudal Japan. This image you see right here is actually of Mary. They had to disguise Mary. I'm talking Mary's mother of Jesus. Okay, the Virgin Mary. They had to disguise her to look like Chinese or Japanese Buddhist figures. This is Guanyin. Okay, they made her look like Guanyin, the goddess of mercy in Chan Buddhism. But you notice on her chest is what? The cross, right? They did their best to disguise their beliefs because Christianity was heavily persecuted in Japan at the time. So anything that was Western influence in Tokugawa Japan for a long time in their history was expelled. They were very xenophobic. Fear of foreigners. Okay. So silver and global commerce. Silver trade became an important to the global trade network. Remember where silver was discovered? Where do we discover silver? The Americas, especially in South America, Potosi. China was the main demander of silver around the world. So if you wanted to get into China's economy, you needed to bring silver. If you wanted anything from China, it had to be silver. They weren't interested in your pots and pans or anything. This is no books. No, we don't want any of that. We want silver. So silver was drained out of Asia, especially Japan, where they had silver. Okay, so silver was taken out of Japan and mostly brought to China. Yes. They still valued gold, but silver at this time was actually a rarer metal. It wasn't as available and around as gold was at the time. In fact, Napoleon, when he hosted a dinner party for people, the plates for the people who were the most prominent were made out of aluminum. Because it was a rare metal. Now aluminum is like whatever, okay? Not all that expensive. It's a mixture of metals, but it was still valuable, okay? So silver vastly enriched the Spanish monarchy. So the monarchy became enriched by silver, and of course that opened them up with the Manila galleons that went from the New World to China. And then they were able to get into the Chinese market because of the silver they brought from the Americas. So again, you see kind of the trade and movement of silver mainly coming across from the Americas. See Acapulco right here? Out of Acapulco into the Philippines, which was a Spanish colony, and then into the Chinese markets. So Spain was benefiting heavily from silver coming out of Mexico. It was a truly global silver trade, went all over the world. Okay, keep going. Here are the Potosi silver mines, an image of them in Latin America. I'm going to keep going. There's a video in here that you can watch. I'll upload the PowerPoint so you can watch the video. Okay. The world hunt. Fur was also a valuable commodity. Fur-bearing animals begin to diminish by 1500. So when settlers come to North America, especially the French and the British, fur is in high demand, especially in what's modern-day Quebec, around the Great Lakes region. So you saw the establishment of fur trade that made its way back to Europe. Russia also became involved. Remember we talked about Siberia and the expansion of the Russians into Siberia. They wanted fur, and the Native Americans and Siberian people in modern-day Russia, they were looking to supply this demand that now there was no more supply. Now they said, okay, we got the supply, and they were able to sell it to them. So fur was also a high demand commodity at the time, as well as silver. that called for soft gold. Quite important to trade and commerce. Again, Native Americans in these Great Lake regions and along some of these river basins were important to, they were kind of an integral relationship with the settler colonies and the fur trappers and traders in these regions. As you can see, where is all of this stuff going to? Yeah, it's going to Europe. It's not going to, some of it, of course, will go to the Americas, like cities St. Louis and such, but they're making their way mostly to Europe or Asia. So you have here, these are Siberian men or Russian men rather, bringing furs with them. And they're bringing furs as a sign of tribute to the Holy Roman Emperor. So valuable trade goods are important to establishing relationships with empires. And this is the Russians and the Holy Roman Empire. Okay? Keep going. This is showing the transatlantic slave trade. Of course, some of the slaves made their way into the East African slave trade, but the majority of slaves were going into the Caribbean and Brazil, working on what types of plantations? Oh, yes. Okay, yes, they're working as slave. What type of agriculture? Well, yeah, plantations are agricultural. Sugar. Thank you, Ryan. Cotton, yes, in North America, but mostly sugarcane. Okay. So again, going back in history, slavery has been part of human society pretty much since the very beginning. And there have been different forms of slavery. Some slaves captured in battle that can work off and gain their freedom. They're not necessarily property of people. But now we have a distinctive form of slavery that's tied to plantations for the most part. And they are sold as property. And they will continue to be, their family members will be property as well. And the origins of this, of course, we talked about last time, come from the Great Dying in the Americas. Not the Great Dying like the Permian extinction, but the Great Dying as in the death that came from diseases from Afro-Eurasia. So Africans, instead of Americans, Native Americans, became the primary source of slave labor, especially on sugarcane plantations. Okay, so slave trade driven by European demand. Atlantic slave trade continues to increase. Who is enslaved? Mostly people from West Africa. Again, we talked about most of them came from Brazil and the Caribbean, and you will see forms of resistance to the slave plantation societies. And there's only one successful one, which we'll look at, which was in Haiti. And that was successful and led to a brutal put down of the French who were there. Here are men who were on the Middle Passage between West Africa and the Americas. As you can see, the conditions they were in were atrocious. If you want to watch a film that kind of documents it, Amistad is a good film to watch that documents slave trade from, I think they're going to Cuba, but they seized the ship. The slaves seized the ship and are captured by American troops, the American Navy. And there's a big debate about whether they should be sent back to Cuba or sent back home or kept in America. It's a pretty good film. It's got Anthony Hopkins and I think Matthew McConaughey is in it too. Anyways. So commerce and people, the Atlantic slave trade, the impact of slave trade in Africa. So it slowed Africa's growth. Who is being sent out of Africa mostly? Slaves, yes, but male or female? Males, right? So you see a demographic shift. And because there are so many women in African society, women start to have more power in African society because women are more prevalent in society as well. So there are social impacts and effects in these societies. So, West Africa has some pretty dramatic impacts and problems that emerge from the slave trade system. Keep going. Okay, he wrote a prominent documentation about the Middle Passage and what it was like. So if you want to refer to, it's in your textbook. There's an excerpt. I forget what it's called, but he wrote about kind of the conditions that slaves were in as they traveled the Middle Passage. Here we have tea and porcelain sets. Of course, this is going to come from what area of the world? Okay, yes, this is European, right? But China, we call this China, right? Why do we call porcelain China? Because that's where it comes from, yeah. This is Ming style, the blue and white, and the British just adapted to their taste. Okay, so porcelain was a product that Europeans desired. Tea, where does tea come from? India and China, okay? East Asia, South Asia, okay? Who has a great taste for tea? The British, right? My papa, okay? Chocolate, okay? Everyone loves chocolate, right? We got to think back to the Columbian Exchange. Chocolate, as it stands in the Americas, if you eat chocolate plain, I know there's a soup, right? Latin America that's like plain chocolate. What's it called?
Oh, it's like sour.
You know what I'm talking. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's not sweet. So by itself, it's pretty bitter. So you have to add sugar cane to it to make it sweet. So these guys looks like they're having a little chocolate party in Spain. Wow, what a great get together. Okay, it's pretty good. So they're mixing it with sugar, obviously. Coffee houses in the Ottoman Empire were popular as well. Okay, so coffee. So we're starting to see that coffee or that trade goods are making their way around the world, and people are adopting them, and they're becoming popular and accepted by various cultures in the world. It's truly a global society now. No one is isolated. Everyone is exposed to one another. We talked about this. This is a style of Costa art, but what is unique is this man is in Western dress, right? So you're starting to see clothing associated with status as well. So although he is probably of mixed race, he's probably of higher status, right? And that's indicated by the clothes he is wearing, okay? All right.
Is west really a direction? Because if you keep going in either direction,
West is a direction, yes.
yeah, so
I
if
know.
you keep going around the world, you're gonna end up in the same spot.
But you're heading west.
But you're.
Yeah, but if you head east, you're gonna go the same way.
Yeah. The Earth is round.
So dull.
You know, it's a sphere. Okay. Anyways, we're having this argument live on here, but it's being recorded. Anyways, so how answer this question? This is kind of like a concluding question to this Nearpod, but just answer it. It's how will trade lead to empire building by Europeans in the next time period? So how is trade going to influence Europeans to want to build empire and expand their empires? How is trade going to be a motivator in that? Think about that and respond. There's no right or wrong answer. There are better answers